Good morning, bonjour à tous. Je suis Charlie Angus, député fédéral de Timmins Bay James. Wache bonjour. I'm here on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. We are awaiting the release of the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPPC. Talks are ongoing over the final wording, but what we know is that the IPCC has warned that the window to stop catastrophic climate change is rapidly closing and that the steps being taken by government are little more than half measures. And the world is facing what they are calling an ecosystem collapse. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that the IPCC has laid out a, quote, atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of failed climate leadership. He's also said that delay means death. So speaking of delay, last week the Trudeau government released their roadmap to lower emissions in Canada. Unfortunately, it continues to favor the interests of the oil lobby and will guarantee that Canada yet again fails to meet its international targets. Environment Minister Steven Guilbeault is promising that Canada will have a 40% drop in emissions by 2030, but it is a wish list with no hard targets. Last year at COP26, Prime Minister Trudeau promised the world he would finally impose an emissions cap. But there is no credible cap on the horizon. And the proposed cuts to oil and gas are not 40%, but rather 31%. And this in a sector that has seen huge increases in emissions. And to get there, the government has promised to invest heavily in unproven carbon capture technology. The IPCC scientists are warning that carbon capture is not only unproven, but will be prohibitively expensive to use quickly and at the scale required. This past January, 400 scientists and environmental experts wrote to Finance Minister Freeland, urging her not to accept the pitch from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, who are asking for $75 billion in public subsidies for carbon capture. And what we're hearing from the government, that the upcoming budget, the big oil lobby has been heard again. The Trudeau government is betting their credibility and the future of our children on carbon capture. And this means that the Trudeau government will once again miss their targets. They've established 10 international targets to meet the Paris Accord, and they've missed every single one. And why will they miss it? Well, it's because even with the other investments that they're promising, it is clear that carbon capture will not be online till 2028 or 2029, which will be too late. And secondly, Minister Guilbeault has already stated in his report that the promise to turn Canada's extremely high GHG emissions oil will use carbon capture to create a, quote, lower carbon alternative to compete on the world markets. And so this Trudeau government's policy continues focused on the bogus premise that they can increase oil production by somehow getting to net zero, because all this increased oil production will be shipped offshore where somehow it doesn't count as part of our emissions. But the planet knows. Last week, the Conger ice shelf in East Antarctica collapsed because of record heat. And at the same time, the Trudeau government announced a 300,000 barrel a day increase in oil production. This will spell catastrophe for our climate strategies. Last week, Environmental Defence issued a report that the Trudeau government is providing more public financing to oil and gas than any other G20 country. And of carbon capture, the federal and provincial governments have already given the order of $5.8 billion on this unproven technology, and the result has been a yearly capture rate of less than 0.05% of Canada's emissions. That is a ridiculously low return for the money spent. So what do we need to do? Well, as part of the negotiations with the Liberal government, the New Democrats are pushing to end subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. We are talking with them about moving forward on a home energy retrofit program that will help Canadian families while reducing emissions. And that's all important, but the big work remains. The work of getting a credible plan in place by 2025 to accelerate the trajectory of net zero emissions, and a negotiated plan for a just transition. So let's unpack that and what it means. We are calling for the direct investments in a clean energy economy of the scale that's required, that we will actually meet our climate targets, and to transition workers to the huge opportunities that is available in the renewable sector. A study released by Clean Energy Canada shows that Canada's clean energy sector is employing 430,500 people. That's almost double what's employed in the oil sector. And by 2030, that number is projected to grow 50% to 639,200 employees. And at the same time, Canada's fossil fuel will see a further 9% drop in employment. So what we're looking at is if we invest in clean energy renewables, we will see huge returns in terms of jobs and the economy, while we're only expected to get a 9% growth from fossil fuels despite the billions that we're giving them. I'll just give you one other study that was done by Calgary Economic Development and Edmonton Global that's concluded that the transition to a clean energy economy in Western Canada would contribute $61 billion to the GDP. But that will require significant investments, and we're not seeing that now. This Parliament has a life of 3 years. The New Democrats will use this time to push government to accept the heavy responsibility we have as this generation of legislators to act in the face of a looming climate catastrophe. And part of that is to be part of what could be the best good news story of this century, of offering Canada's energy workers and Canadian families the opportunity to build a clean energy future that will provide good jobs and a future for our children. The clock is ticking, the planet is burning, the window is rapidly closing, and we are committed as New Democrats to push this government to get a credible plan in place, because the plan that's there now will not cut it. La semaine dernière, le gouvernement Trudeau a publié son plan pour réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre et respecter nos obligations internationales face à la crise climatique. Malheureusement, ce plan continue de profiter aux intérêts de grands lobbies pétroliers. Le plan du gouvernement repose sur un investissement massif des fonds publics pour favoriser le développement de la technologie carbon capture. Le gouvernement affirme que la technologie carbon capture va permettre à l'industrie pétrolière d'augmenter sa production tout en réduisant ses émissions. Ce n'est pas possible. En réalité, le gouvernement Trudeau n'a pas atteint toutes les cibles climatiques et ce plan est garanti de ne pas tenir la promesse de réduire les émissions de 40% d'ici 2030. Le monde fait face à une catastrophe climatique et le gouvernement continue de jouer et des jeux politiques. Les néo-démocrates demandent des investissements massifs pour le développement d'une énergie propre. C'est possible d'investir dans les énergies propres pour créer des bons emplois et de protéger la planète. I'm here, ready to take any questions.
It doesn't seem that there are questions this morning,
Nope.
So this concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse ce matin. Merci.
Thank you.